Hi, well, in this talk we're going to be looking at one of the three patriarchs of the Jewish people, or the Israelites. Now, we have previously considered Abraham, and today we're going to be looking at his son Isaac. Now, his name, Yitzhak, means he will laugh. It was given on the basis that his mother, Sarai, laughed in disbelief when God told her that she would have a son at her ripe old age. Now, interestingly, God would at this time change Sarai's name to Sarah, as he would indeed change Abram's name to Abraham. He would add the element of his name, Yahweh, to both of them. Now, Sarah was Abraham's half-sister, and Isaac, being the son of Abraham, was now the 11th descendant of Noah. Both Abraham and Sarah were born here in the Ur of the Chaldees, in the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia. Ur was an impressive city. It was very wealthy, it was comfortable, it was well ahead of its time. They had elementary central heating systems in their homes. Archaeologists have discovered much about the advanced state of the various Sumerian civilizations, and they lived in style. They were highly advanced, as I say. They had great education and universities of study. We've even found ancient tablets that were school reports for parents of students in university. They report on the goings-on of the boys in the school, and you could be reading about the young people of today. They got up to the same old pranks. Nothing's changed. So here's how the story goes. Isaac was the promised son of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham was very close to 100 years old. He was without children. And as was typical at the time, he lived in a tent. And he'd set his tent up right here. It's at a place called Mamre, a little place just north of Hebron. His tent was pitched next to a terebinth tree, which is today known as a pistachio palestina. He was sat under the tree in the cool of its shade one day when he saw the Lord and two others walking towards him. And he ran to the Lord, bowing down to the ground, and he said, "Lord, if I've found favour, just a little favour in your eyes, then don't just pass me by. Come and sit under the tree and I'll get you a morsel of bread. I'll wash your feet for you. Allow me to refresh your heart," it says. And so the Lord agreed. And Abraham hurried to Sarah and asked her to cook some bread, and they quickly cooked a veal meal. "Where's your wife?" one of them asked. "She's in the tent." And then the Lord said, "I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now we're told that Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent. And we're told that she was behind the one who was talking, so he had his back to her. And we're told that she was well beyond childbearing age. She was around 90 years old. And so it says that she laughed to herself, and she thought, "I'm worn out, and my Lord is old, and how will I ever have such a pleasure of children?" And then the Lord said to Abraham, "Now, why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now I'm old?' Is anything too hard for your Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Well, we're told that Sarah was a bit afraid that she'd said this, so she lied and she said, "No, I didn't laugh." But the Lord said, "Yes, you did. You did laugh." Well, there's an awkward moment right there. Well, in the years leading up to all of this, Abraham had a child with Hagar, Sarah's handservant. He was trying through his own methods to produce an heir, and Ishmael was born 15 years before Isaac. Hagar and Ishmael were encouraged to leave by Sarah, and Ishmael became the father of numerous Arab nations. But God's covenant would pass down the line of Isaac, not Ishmael. Now, sometime later, God tested Abraham, and I'm sure we all know the story quite well of the proposed sacrifice. Now, I don't know how old you think Isaac was when he was taken for sacrifice, but he was not a child. He was not a young child. It was quite a long time after he was born. We know from Sarah's age at his birth and her death that he must have been older than 5 and younger than 37. And the phrase used in Genesis for some time later more often means a long amount of time later. So some time after he was born, he was certainly old enough to, number 1, travel 3 arduous days. Number 2, he was old enough to carry a lot of firewood. And number 3, he was old enough to assist his elderly father of 120 or so years old. And the term boy that's used here is used of men in their prime. It's the same word that was used of Absalom in his manhood, in his young prime. It's used for a junior officer in the army. And the Jews and Josephus believe that he was between 25 and 33. In other words, he was around the same age of Jesus when Jesus was sacrificed. And it's interesting to note that Abraham and Isaac travelled to Mount Moriah, to the very spot that Jesus was to die nearly 2,000 years later. At that spot, a lamb was found for Abraham with its head caught in thorns. And God said to Abraham, I don't require this of you and your son. But as for me and my son, we will go through with it at this very place. What a picture that points us to the redeeming work to come. Now Sarah died at the age of 127, and Abraham buried her in the cave of Machpelah. Later, Abraham took a new wife, a lady called Keturah, who bore him 6 sons, including Midian, the father of the Midianites, who would give Moses such a hard time centuries later. Now, one day when Abraham was very old, he asked his senior master of his household to swear to him by Yahweh, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that the servant would ensure Isaac did not marry a local Canaanite, but would marry a girl from his native people, who were 400 miles away in a place called Haran in modern-day Turkey. Now, although Abraham came from he and his father Terah and his brother Nahor had settled in Haran. And it was here that Abraham left his father and his brother and went on to travel to the promised land. Now this was quite an ask for the servant of Abraham. Would you make sure you find a girl from that family in that place? And he said, what if I find a girl, but she's unwilling to come and live here? Should I take Isaac to her? No, Abraham said, make sure you do not take Isaac there. If the woman is unwilling, then you're released from this oath. Well, the servant left on this mammoth journey with 10 camels laden with gifts. He was going to find Abraham's family. Now, Rebekah was the granddaughter of Abraham's brother Nahor. And the servant arrived at Haran, and he led his camels to the well to drink. But first of all, he prayed and he asked God for success for his master Abraham. He prayed this: I'm standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to one of these young women, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, let it be that she says, drink, and I'll also draw water for your camels too. Let her be the one chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you've shown kindness to my master. Well, before he'd even finished praying, it says Rebekah came out, and it happened just as he'd asked, and he couldn't believe it. Whose daughter are you? He asked. I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, she replied. And we've plenty of straw and bedding if you want to spend the night. Well, we're told that the man just bowed down and he worshipped the Lord right there, saying, Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham. who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on this journey to the house of my master's relatives." And it says that the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. As a result, Rebekah's brother ran out and welcomed the man and insisted that he stay and have some food. Well, the man refused to eat until he'd said what he'd come to say to all of them. And he said this: "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has blessed my master abundantly. He's become wealthy. He's given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants and camels and donkeys. And my master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age. And he's given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, 'You must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but go to my father's family and to my own clan and get a wife for my son there.' And he recounted everything to them, including the prayer that he prayed at the well. And the family agreed that this was indeed the Lord's work. Well, the man was eager to go the next day and get on with it, but the family wanted Rebekah to stay for another 10 days and then leave after she'd said her farewells. And Rebekah was consulted about this, but she disagreed. She was ready to leave immediately, and so they did. Now Isaac at the time was 40 years old. He was living in the Negev desert at a place called Beer Lahai, which means the well of the living one. It's near Kadesh Barnea. And we're told that one evening he went out into the fields to meditate, and he looked up and he saw camels approaching. It was Rebekah and the servant. They were quickly married, and it seems they were a pretty good match. Abraham lived long enough to see Isaac marry Rebekah, and he died at 175 years. And he was buried by his 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael, in the same cave as Sarah was buried in. Well, after all this, God spoke to Isaac and reiterated his promise to Abraham, that you will live in the land which I tell you, dwell in this land, and I will be with you, Isaac, as I was with Abraham. I will bless you, for to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. I will make your descendants multiply as the stars in heaven." Well, the couple remained childless for years. In the end, Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife to fall pregnant. And when Isaac reached around 60 years old, they would go on to have 2 sons, twins. And we're told that these twin boys struggled with each other even whilst in the womb. And God spoke directly to Rebekah at this time. He said, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Well, the oldest one came out red and hairy and was named Esau. His brother was soon delivered, and the youngest grabbed the heel of the oldest and was therefore called Yaakov, or Jacob, the grasper. Esau was to sell his inheritance for a pot of stew sometimes later, and it says that Esau despised his birthright. Now, sometime later, due to a severe famine, Isaac and Rebekah and the family went to live in a town called Gerar. It was a Philistine town just here, ruled by a king called Abimelech. Now, Rebekah was beautiful, and Isaac feared that he might be killed so that someone could take Rebekah. So he did what Abraham, his father, did years earlier, and he told the town that his wife was his sister. And the king saw Isaac being affectionate towards Rebekah, and he called him in and said, "She's clearly your wife and not your sister. Why did you lie to us? You could have brought your God's judgment upon us." And he ordered that no man should touch Rebekah. And they lived there for some time, and God prospered them more than all of the locals. He prospered him with many cattle and much wealth. And later Abimelech was to tell Isaac to leave. He said, "You're much mightier than us, and the people are becoming jealous." So they left, and they went south. And God promised him again that he would multiply his descendants, and Isaac built an altar there, pitched his tent to settle down there. And he asked his servants to start to dig a well so they could settle in this area. Now a little after this, Abimelech and two other men, one was called his friend and the other one was called the master of his army, came to Isaac. And Isaac said, "Why have you come here? You obviously hate me. You've turned me out of your land." And they disagreed. "We don't hate you. We recognize that your God Yahweh is with you. And your God is blessing you. And we want to make peace with you." And so they feasted together and they agreed on a peace treaty. It was the next day that his servants came and said, "Come, we found fresh water in that well that we were digging." And they called the well Sheba, after the oath of peace. Sheba means oath, the oath of peace that he just made. And the place was called Beersheba. And it's a thriving town even today. Well, the last we hear of Isaac was as an old and blind man. He knows he's nearing death and he wants to pass on the inheritance to Esau, his oldest son. Rebekah had come to favour Esau over Jacob, and between them they schemed to trick the old man. And Jacob would receive the inheritance that his brother had so cheaply sold him all those years earlier. They dressed him as Esau, and the old man laid his hands upon the youngest son. "May God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your own brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be anyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." What great bitterness and enmity exploded between the two sons. Jacob fled from the anger of his brother who sought to kill him. And Jacob fled all the way to Haran in Turkey and stayed for a time with his uncle Laban. Where Jacob went, but not before Isaac blessed him and instructed him to take a wife from amongst his wider family in Haran. Esau saw that his father had blessed Jacob and heard the instructions about a wife. And knowing that a Canaanite wife would distress his father, he went ahead and did just that. He married a daughter of Ishmael. And Esau would become the father of a great nation himself, the Edomites. They lived here in this most remarkable city known today as Petra. It's cut out of the rocks and the cliffs of modern-day Jordan. Well, before he was known as the God of Israel, Yahweh was known as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He was a covenant-keeping God who kept faithful to these three down the ages. A God who remains faithful to his people, the Jews today, and to those of us that have been fortunate enough to be grafted into this Jewish family. We too are an offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We too, like the Jews, have a decision to make. Do we choose to love and follow Yahweh, the God of Israel, or not? Many, many Jews today follow Jesus, and we should be forever grateful that God has grafted us into his people, and he remains faithful to his people and to us today. He is a covenant-keeping God. We should be grateful that so many of his people shed the gospel abroad to so many who were Gentile unbelievers. Grateful that they died for the sake of the gospel, that we might be grafted into this family of the covenant. It's interesting that the two descendants of Esau and Jacob would come head to head 1500 years later as Jesus stood before King Herod. He stood before him right here at Herod's palace in Jerusalem. Did you realize that Herod was an Edomian or an Edomite, a descendant of Esau? And Herod questioned Jesus with many words, but Jesus, we're told, remained silent. And we're told that Herod and his men treated Jesus with contempt, mocked him, and accused him. while Jesus was about to pay the price for the sake of the covenant that God made with Abraham and his son Isaac 2,000 years earlier. Abraham was told that you do not need to sacrifice your son on Mount Moriah, and this day, 2,000 years later, God would go through with it. He would sacrifice his son at the very spot at the top of Mount Moriah. What an amazing covenant-keeping God we both serve and love. God bless you all.